This is Lowell, Massachusetts. 150 years ago, it was one of the most important cities in America, the place where the modern factory was invented. It sits here, the far northeast corner of Massachusetts, about 25 miles from Boston, where the Merrimack River makes a bend and drops toward the sea. In 1820, there was almost nothing on this spot. A few farms, a scattering of houses, and a set of waterfalls that nobody had yet found a use for. It did not grow slowly the way old cities do. It was planned, designed on paper, then built, deliberately, to make cloth on a scale the world had never seen. For a while, it worked better than anyone dreamed. Farmland became the second largest city in the state in a single generation. And then the machines that built it were sent somewhere cheaper, and the city was left to work out what a factory town is for once the factories are gone. This is the story of how you build a city out of nothing, and how the same idea that builds it can walk away and leave it standing empty. The story starts in Britain, with a secret. In the early 1800s, Britain had the power loom, a machine that wove cloth by water power instead of by hand. It was the most valuable industrial technology on Earth, and Britain guarded it fiercely. Taking the plans out of the country was a crime. So a Boston merchant named Francis Cabot Lowell went to Britain, toured the mills as a polite visitor, and memorized them. He carried no drawings that could be seized. He carried the machine in his head and reassembled it back in Massachusetts. Lowell died young, in 1817, before the real city was built. But the group of investors he left behind, the Boston Associates, took his idea and did something no one had tried. They decided not just to build a mill, they would build an entire city around it, from scratch. They found their spot on the Merrimack River, where the water dropped more than 30 feet over a series of falls. That drop was the power source. They dug a network of canals to channel it through the mills and named the place after the man who never saw it, Lowell. Now they had mills, they needed hands to run them. And here the Boston Associates made a choice that made Lowell famous around the world. In Britain, the mills were worked by the poorest people available in conditions that horrified visitors. The Associates wanted to prove that America could industrialize without creating that misery. So they recruited a very specific workforce, young, unmarried women from the New England farms. They became known as the mill girls. Most were in their teens and 20s. They came for a few years, earned real wages of their own for the first time in their lives, and then usually left to marry or move on. And that matters more than it sounds. For most of these women, it was the first money they had ever earned that was truly their own. Not handed to a father, not tied to a marriage. Wages in their own hand, that they could save or send home or spend on a book. For a young woman in the 1830s, that was close to revolutionary. The company kept them in supervised boarding houses, with curfews, required church attendance, and strict rules about conduct. It was part genuine care and part control. A respectable workforce was good for business, and good for the image the associates were selling. And the mill girls did something nobody expected. In their few free hours, they founded lending libraries, attended lectures, and taught themselves subjects the farms had never offered. They published their own literary magazine, written and edited by working women, filled with their own stories and poems. It was sold and read well beyond the city. Lowell became a place important men traveled to see. Even Charles Dickens visited and wrote about it with something close to disbelief because it looked nothing like the grim mill towns he knew from England. Through the 1830s and 40s, Lowell exploded. Mill after mill went up along the canals, huge blocks of brick 5 and 6 stories high, each one a wall of windows. Inside, hundreds of power looms ran at once off a single river, connected by a forest of spinning belts and shafts overhead. The noise was so loud that workers learned to read each other's lips because no voice could carry over it. They called it Spindle City. The Manchester of America, after the great mill city of England, except that this one was supposed to be better. At its height, Lowell held around 40 mills and tens of thousands of workers, producing enough cotton cloth every year to wrap around the earth many times over. For a few decades, this small patch of Massachusetts was one of the industrial wonders of the world. The canals that powered it were an engineering marvel in their own right, moving water through the heart of the city like a second river with a job to do. Everything about Lowell said the same thing. This was the future. And it was permanent. But a mill is a business, and a business wants its costs to fall. As competition grew, the companies did the obvious thing. They cut the wages and they sped up the machines, so each worker tended more looms for less money. The mill girls did not accept it quietly. In the 1830s, thousands of them walked out of the mills in organized protests, what they called turnouts. For young women in that era, to publicly stop work and march was close to scandalous. They did it anyway. In the 1840s, they went further. They organized formally, gathered thousands of signatures, and petitioned the state government for a 10-hour working day. It was one of the first labor movements in American history, and it was led largely by women in their early 20s. They did not win much at first. The hours stayed long, but they had shown the country something, that the people inside the machine were not part of the machine, and that they would organize. So the companies solved the problem a different way. If the farm daughters would organize and demand better, you simply replace them with workers who could not. In the 1840s, famine drove huge numbers of Irish families to America, many desperate for any work at any wage. The mill girls, with their libraries and their petitions, were gradually pushed out. In came a workforce with no leverage and no choice. And it did not stop with the Irish. Over the next 60 years, wave after wave of immigrants came through Lowell's gates. French Canadians, Greeks, Poles, Portuguese. Each new group arrived poorer than the last, worked the worst jobs, and slowly climbed, while a newer, cheaper group took their place at the bottom. The city that had been built to prove industry could be gentle had quietly become an ordinary mill town, running on whoever was most desperate that year. And at the very bottom of that workforce were the children. By the early 1900s, mills across America, Lowell among them, ran heavily on child labor. Boys and girls who should have been in school, standing at machines instead. We know exactly what they looked like, because a photographer named Lewis Hine set out to prove it. Working for a reform committee, he talked his way into mills across the country and photographed the children he found. He came to Lowell in 1911. He wrote down their names, their ages, and their addresses so that no one could later claim the pictures were staged. This is a doffer, a boy whose job was to pull the full bobbins off the spinning machines and replace them all day in the noise and the cotton dust. Hine guessed his age at around 12. The boy was not sure himself. Beside another, Hine wrote that the boy was apparently 12 years old and had already been working in the mill for 2 years. 2 years, which would have put him at the machines at around 10. The captions go on like that, one after another, in his flat, careful handwriting. Some of the captions Hine wrote are hard to read even now. Beside one small boy, he noted simply that the child looked weak and anemic and gave his age as 10 years old. Others he found not in the mills, but around them. Boys who set pins in the bowling alleys late into the night, then went to the mills in the morning. Childhood, in a city that ran on cheap hands, was simply another thing that could be spent. Hine did not photograph these children as victims exactly. He photographed them as people, looking straight back at the camera, and that is what made the pictures impossible to ignore. Taken in Lowell and dozens of towns like it, they helped build the case that finally forced America to limit child labor. The numbers had been public for years. It was the faces that changed the law. But the deeper problem was not the working conditions. It was the machines themselves. Because a power loom does not care where it stands, in the early 1900s, the mill owners realized they could build the exact same mills in the American South, where labor was cheaper, unions were weaker, and no state law made them shorten the day. So they did. One by one, the great Lowell mills moved their machines south, or simply shut the gates. The looms that had built the city, the ones too loud to speak over, were unbolted from the floors, loaded onto rail cars, and taken away to be run by someone cheaper. And a mill with no looms in it is not a mill at all. It is just a very large, very empty brick building with a river running past it that no longer has anything to turn. By the time the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, Lowell was already gutted. It became one of the hardest hit cities in the country, a place government photographers were sent to document because the decline was so complete. Rows of workers' houses stood beside mills that no longer ran. And then the same thing happened again on a bigger scale. After the machines went south, the industry kept chasing cheaper labor, out of the country entirely, overseas. The American textile mill, the thing Lowell had invented, slowly stopped existing in America at all. For decades, Lowell just sat with it. Empty mills, high unemployment, a downtown built for 100,000 mill workers who were no longer there. Then, in the 1970s, the city did something unusual with its ruins. Instead of tearing the mills down, it turned them into a museum of themselves. In 1978, the old industrial core became a National Historical Park. Today, you can walk into one of the old boot mills, and they will switch on a room of the original looms for you. For a few minutes, the noise comes back. The noise that was once too loud to speak over. Then a guide turns it off, and it is quiet again. So this is what Lowell became. The city that invented the American factory is now the place you go to see what an American factory used to be. It is a strange kind of monument, not to a war or a general or a president, but to an idea about money. That you can build an entire city around a machine, fill it with people, and call it permanent. And that the machine, in the end, owes the city nothing at all. Lowell was built in a single decade. It spent the next 100 years learning what the machines had somehow always known, that they were only ever passing through.